In a future when space travel is the norm, a spaceship is traveling through a new galaxy. The whole crew is asleep, thanks to suspended animation except for Riddick, who tries to guess things about the other passengers' lives through their smells. Suddenly debris from a meteor storm hits the ship and pierces the hull. The computer immediately activates the alarm and wakes up the main crew, however the debris goes through the captain's pod and kills him. Pilot Carolyn and navigator Greg stumble out of their pods and rush to the control panel, only to discover that the ship has been pushed into a planet's atmosphere and the gravity is making it descend at a very dangerous speed. Greg tries to call for help, but the communication antenna is damaged. Carolyn rushes to the pilot chair and releases various parts of the ship before putting it into a roll. The spaceship slows down a little bit, but it isn't enough, so she has no choice but to drop the passenger pods. When Greg realizes what she wants to do, he blocks the airlocks. Carolyn tries her best to stabilize the ship as it begins to come apart and a piece of metal breaks the front window. Eventually the ship lands on the planet and slides on the ground for a few miles, which makes it lose even more parts. Police officer William leaves his pod during the process and has to hold on tight not to fall through the crumbling walls. When the ship finally stops, the crew leave their pods and discover there are only a few survivors. William notices he's lost his gun and goes back to his pod to find it, only to suddenly be attacked by Riddick. Without hesitation William hits him with his baton until he brings Riddick down, then he ties him to a metal beam. The rest of the crew opens the closed pods, finding a few more survivors but mostly bodies. Carolyn looks for Greg among the debris and discovers he's been impaled by a metal bar. They don't have any medicine because that part of the cabin is gone, so Carolyn kicks everyone out of the room and keeps Greg company while he dies. Afterward the crew checks out the planet, only to discover they're in a desert. There are mysterious spires in the distance, 3 suns, and the compass doesn't work. The crew thanks Carolyn for saving her and calls her captain, making her feel guilty for having wanted to get rid of them. Then Carolyn sees Riddick and William explains he's a dangerous criminal who escaped from a maximum prison, revealing he isn't truly human. Next the group checks the cargo and finds some alcohol, but no water. While everyone is distracted, Riddick notices the metal beam is broken at the top and twists his shoulders until he's high enough to pass his handcuffed hands through the crack to free himself. When the crew discovers Riddick is gone, they grab a bunch of weapons and get ready to go looking for him and water. The group splits, leaving a few survivors back to protect the ship while the rest searches the area. They see a few trees, but when they get closer they're disappointed to discover they're actually huge bone structures. The team looks around, not noticing Riddick hiding among the bones. As she takes a rest, Carolyn admits to William that she almost got rid of all the passengers. While she's distracted, Riddick secretly cuts a strand of her hair with a knife. After Abu's 3 sons find a toy robot buried in the sand, the group reaches an abandoned human settlement full of pots and jugs, which means there used to be water here. Carolyn finds a model of this planet's solar system and learns that because of the positions of the 3 suns, this place never gets nighttime. She's also excited to find an aircraft, but it has no power left and its wings are broken. Back in the shipwreck, Paris tells Shaza and Jack that he's heard a strange noise. Jack looks through a hole in the wall and sees a man walking around the ship, so they assume it's Riddick. The trio gets ready to attack, but when the man gets closer they realize it's just another survivor. Suddenly the man is shot from behind by Shaza's boyfriend Zeke, who also thought this was Riddick. Meanwhile the actual Riddick is chilling with a drink nearby. Afterward Zeke finishes digging a grave and begins bringing all the crew bodies. He notices a hole in the wall of the grave and takes a closer look, only to be dragged inside and attacked by a mysterious force. Zeke tries shooting to defend himself and Shaza comes over when she hears the gunshots, but it's too late, only Zeke's blood is left. When Shaza looks up she sees Riddick and assumes he did it. Riddick immediately runs off, but William has also heard the gunshots and arrives to stop him. As the men fight, William takes off Riddick's goggles and the sunlight hurts his eyes, which makes it easier for William and Shaza to recapture him. Moments later Riddick is chained inside the shipwreck again. Carolyn asks about the location of Zeke's body, but Riddick just says it's not him the crew has to be scared of. He startles Carolyn when he suddenly stands up, showing his unusual eyes that let him see in the dark but hurt during the daytime. Then he says he's killed people in the past but he didn't kill Zeke, so they need to check the hole again. William thinks Riddick is lying, but Carolyn decides to go inside the hole with a rope attached to her body just in case. After lots of crawling, she makes it to a small cavern and finds lots of holes in the ceiling that turn out to be the spires. She also hears noises as something moves in the dark and turns around to find Zeke's foot. At that moment her flashlight is knocked off by creatures known as bioraptors, who want to eat her too. A terrified Carolyn begins climbing up the spire, but the rope doesn't let her go too far and she starts to slide back into the cavern. Carolyn yells for help and the crew follows the noise to the right spire, breaking it to rescue her. For a second she appears to be safe, but then the creatures begin to pull the rope and she's dragged into the hole again, so William and Abu rush to cut the rope to save her again. Afterward William goes to see Riddick and explains the situation before shooting the chains off and giving him back his goggles. Riddick immediately takes William's gun just to scare him off and agrees to help. Next the crew gathers all their belongings and a power cell from the wrecked ship before returning to the settlement. While the crew activates a moisture machine that provides them with some water, Carolyn works on adapting the ship's old electrical connections so they'll take the modern power cell. A quick look into the ship's systems reveals that it'll need 4 more power cells to launch. Looking around the settlement gives the crew a variety of tools. Jack shaves his head and puts on a pair of goggles to emulate Riddick, thinking of him as his idol. Riddick finds a coring room, which is mysteriously chain-locked from the inside. When the group takes a break, they theorize that the former residents were geologists and wonder why they left, but Riddick thinks they were all killed by the bioraptors. Meanwhile, Abu's son Ali has found a broken wall in the coring room and goes inside. He manages to open a ceiling hatch and the sunlight reveals a bunch of bioraptors that immediately attack him. Ali screams as he runs to hide in the closet, but the monsters follow him there. The crew hears his screaming and shoots the door open to enter the coring room too. At first it appears to be empty, but when Abu opens the other door all the bioraptors fly out and escape through the shaft in the ground. When Abu looks in the closet, he's devastated to find his son dead. While the family buries Ali, the crew looks inside the shaft with a flare and finds lots of skeletons. Riddick explains the geologists hid there because the thick door would stop the bioraptors, but that they came through the cellar. While Shaza apologizes to Riddick for thinking he killed Zeke, William realizes all the creatures on this planet are hurt by sunlight. Carolyn finds a coring sample dated 22 years ago in the same month as now. She returns to the planetary model and changes the date to check the position of the planets in the present. It turns out that there will be an eclipse soon which will leave the planet in complete darkness for weeks, which means the creatures will be free to come out. A worried Carolyn announces they must finish repairing the wing and brings the other power cells quickly before darkness comes. In private, William warns her that last time Riddick escaped by flying a ship and killing the pilot, so they mustn't bring the power cells until the last minute. Then William hurries to leave the ship so he can throw up outside. Riddick notices he's shaking and guesses he's going through withdrawal. Minutes later Riddick also talks to Carolyn in private. He reveals that William isn't a cop, he's actually a mercenary who hasn't killed Riddick yet because he wants to collect the bounty. Riddick also tells her that William is an addict. A furious Carolyn goes to confront William, walking on him as he's injecting his eye. After William admits he's not a cop, Carolyn discovers his stash of medicine, which could have saved Greg but William kept it secret to consume recreationally. She begins yelling at him but William interrupts her by showing her the scars he got from his fight with Riddick, saying he can take care of himself. When the crew goes outside, they discover the planets are already moving close so the darkness will arrive soon. Shaza finishes fixing a Sandcat vehicle and the crew jumps on it to go back to the shipwreck. As the sky starts to turn black, the crew works as fast as possible to load all the power cells on the vehicle. Unfortunately they aren't quick enough and when the darkness finally takes over, they can't leave because their car is solar powered. At that moment they hear screeching and see all the bioraptors flying out of the spires. Everyone runs to take shelter, but Shaza and Riddick fall behind and have to drop to the ground to avoid getting hit by the bioraptors when they fly down. Once they're gone Shaza tries to join the crew but the bioraptors immediately come back and surround her, tearing her body in two and flying off with the upper half. Riddick lays low and makes sure the creatures are actually gone before standing up. The spires then start breaking and Riddick takes off his goggles so his night vision can watch bigger bioraptors coming out. Afterward the crew wanders around the wrecked ship while hearing the monsters continuously screeching. They theorize that bioraptors use sound to see in the dark, like bats. They can also hear something moving in the walls and Paris wants to go out, so the others have to stop him. Abu manages to open a container and the crew hides inside before he locks it. Suddenly a bioraptor pierces a wall with its claw but Abu moves away just in time. Then Riddick finds a blowtorch and burns a hole in the back wall so the group can get into the cargo hold. While the others move things to block the hole, Riddick looks around the room and sees a small bioraptor hiding in a corner. At that moment Abu's second son Hassan also sees it, so Riddick tells him to stay still to avoid being detected. However, when the creature moves too close, Hassan panics and starts running away, only to be immediately killed by another bioraptor. More monsters come out so Riddick runs to reunite with the crew, who have their flashlights out and accidentally blind him. The bioraptor chasing him is also blinded by the light and runs off when William opens fire. A gunshot still manages to kill it and the body falls in front of the group, who notices that light burns the bioraptor's skin. Afterward the crew discusses what to do. Caroline wants to walk back to the settlement while carrying the cells and use their flashlights as protection. William thinks it's too dangerous and they should wait for the eclipse to be over, but Abu reminds him it could take forever and Caroline points out hiding didn't work for the geologists. When the argument escalates and William tries to get violent, Riddick immediately stops him. After grabbing the blowtorch and all the flashlights they can find, the group comes out with Riddick at the front since he can guide them with his night vision. A bioraptor suddenly comes out of the ship but thankfully it doesn't see them and flies off. Then the crew reaches the main cabin and puts together a sled with some pieces of metal to load it with the power cells and glow tubes. Riddick tells everyone to check their bodies for cuts because the bioraptors may smell the blood. Once everything is ready, the group finally takes off. They run in the darkness with Riddick at the front, finding the way while the others push the sled. The bioraptors are always around them but don't come too close because of the lights. When the blowtorch stops working, Paris tries grabbing a flashlight and accidentally drops it. Jack leaves the light circle to retrieve it and a monster tries to attack him, so Abu jumps on top of him to protect him with his lights. The Bioraptor flies above them and William scares it with a few shots, but Paris still panics and crawls away, pulling at the tubes as he moves and breaking the battery that's keeping the lights on. Paris stops when he notices he's bleeding and takes a sip of his drink to spit it on a lighter, which creates a big flame that reveals the Bioraptors surrounding him. When the fire goes off, the monsters feed on Paris, which Riddick can see in detail. After lighting some torches and flares, the team notices their own tracks on the ground and worries about possibly being lost. Riddick explains he took an extra round because he needed time to think since there's a canyon ahead. He also points out Jack is bleeding and calls him a girl. Jack admits she's actually a girl who dressed as a boy so the other crew members wouldn't mess with her. Since she's on her shark week, the Bioraptors have been tracking her blood all along. Because of this, Carolyn thinks being out is a mistake and they should go back. William immediately gets angry and begins insulting her, so Abu comes to her defense. This makes William tell everyone that Carolyn almost threw them all off the ship and she attacks him to shut him up, but William easily knocks her down. Since William and Riddick keep moving forward, the others have no choice but to follow them. As they cross the boneyard, William says that Riddick should throw Jack at the creatures as bait. This enrages Riddick, who immediately starts fighting William to use him as bait instead. The gun is shot in the struggle and Carolyn tells the others to hide. William dislocates Riddick's arm, but he punches him off and just puts his arm back into place. The fight continues as both men take out their knives, attacking each other and falling to the ground. Riddick quickly recovers and slashes William's back at the same time his flare goes off. As Riddick disappears into the darkness, a Bioraptor flies down to make William fall, then it stabs him with its claw and begins eating him. Afterward, Riddick reunites with the crew, who are running back to the wrecked ship. He makes them understand it's a bad idea, so they start making their way to the settlement again. As they cross the boneyard, Riddick checks a Bioraptor skull and realizes it has a blind spot between its ears. Eventually they make it to the canyon and the group begins running to cross it while Riddick carries the cells. Soon the Bioraptors are flying above them, but they don't attack because of the torches. Instead, the beasts start fighting each other and their dead bodies fall on the ground, so the crew has to dodge all the limbs and blood. There's a big skeleton in the middle of the canyon and the team has to slow down to cross under it. Suddenly one of the monster bodies wakes up and grabs the leg of Abu's last son Suleiman, causing him to drop his torch. Abu holds onto Suleiman and when the torches scare the Bioraptor off, he manages to pull the boy back. Suleiman now has a bleeding injury that must be wrapped up. Meanwhile, Riddick is still moving ahead and Jack tries to tell him to wait. At that moment another Bioraptor flies down and captures Jack under some bones. Carolyn tries to burn the creature with her flashlight, but it gets knocked off her hand by the Bioraptor's tail. Riddick finally comes back and catches the beast's paws while dodging its attempts at biting him. When he has an opening, he takes out his knife and quickly kills it. Now the team can keep moving, although Suleiman has trouble running and Abu has to help him. To make matters worse, it starts raining, which puts off most of their torches. As Jack and Carolyn try to protect the last flame, a Bioraptor on top of the canyon reaches down with its tail and kidnaps Suleiman, leaving Abu with no family. Then Riddick finds a cave in the canyon wall, so he makes Carolyn, Jack, and Abu hide inside with the last flame and blocks the entrance with a rock before going back to walk with the power cells. While Riddick reaches the settlement and activates the spaceship, the cave trio worries because they can hear the creatures and their flame is going out. Thankfully the cave is full of glowing slugs, so they put them inside their bottles to make new torches. Thinking Riddick will leave them behind, Carolyn leaves the cave and finds Riddick in the ship right before he can take off. Riddick refuses to help her save the others and offers to run away together, so a furious Carolyn tackles him to the ground and reminds him she's the captain. It's easy for Riddick to overpower her and press a knife against her neck, demanding to know if she'd die for Jack and Abu. Carolyn says yes without hesitation. In the cave, Abu and Jack see the rock move and think it's over, but it's just Riddick and Carolyn saving them. Without the cells, the team can run faster through the canyon, but there still are a few Bioraptors on the ground. Riddick makes everyone hold hands and keep running since the monsters just fly off at the sight of the torches. Carolyn, Abu, and Jack soon make it to the settlement and rush into the ship. However, Riddick slips on the mud while helping them and falls behind. A Bioraptor follows him to the settlement, so Riddick meets him face to face. By following its movements, Riddick can stay in its blind spot and not be seen. Unfortunately, a second Bioraptor appears behind him, leaving him trapped. Abu thinks they should leave already, but Carolyn hesitates. When she hears Riddick scream, she follows the noise and finds a severely wounded Riddick on the ground. He can barely move, but Carolyn refuses to give up and tries to help him. When they're about to leave, a Bioraptor stabs her from behind and takes her away. Riddick collapses as he yells in grief. Minutes later, Riddick is on the ship with Abu and Jack. He powers up all the engines, only to suddenly turn everything off. A bunch of Bioraptors approaches the aircraft and Riddick waits until they're close enough to activate the engines again, burning or running over all the monsters in one move. As the ship reaches outer space, Jack asks Riddick what they're going to tell the authorities later. He explains that Riddick died somewhere on the planet, implying he's become a caring human again. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.